Today, once again, for the second time, I'm going to try to model this type of vulnerability, this type of letting go of perfection and forgetting that perfect offering, and try to go as little on script as possible, try to be present, trying to be here. So please, all the grace you can give me to be able to do this without a script and preach from the heart. Now, I'm going to cheat if I need to. This is here for me. But the reason why I wanted to go off script, because this is really something that's always on my mind, always in my heart. I'm talking about all the time as it comes up organically in my life. And oftentimes I share with you all when I get up here that as a spiritual humanist, as my identity as a spiritual humanist, I use that as a tool for engaging the world. I use that as a way to experience the world. But that in itself, humanism in itself, just like any other kind of theology, any other kind of way of being, isn't enough. It's what you get from that. It's how you engage it. It's how you dig into it. And for me, using humanism as a tool means that I look to those things in our lives, in our culture, in our world, that we weave together that create a bigger story than us. Things like music, things like art, things like literature, the ways that we've all shaped this world by the stories that we tell. And so one of the ways that I kind of wanted to explore this morning that's really meaningful to me is music, particularly hip hop. The way that hip hop tells a story and weaves a narrative about this world that we live in. And the reason why I chose hip hop, I could have chosen any genre to do this with, but it's very profound the way that hip hop is this very truly uniquely American music art form, born from soul, which was born from funk, which was born from jazz, which was born from blues, which was born from the fields. The way that people take oppression and weave it and make it their own and make a story larger than that, putting themselves squarely in the middle of that narrative for better or for worse. It's not about it being perfect. It's not about it being shiny or even pleasant sometimes, but how we put ourselves in the middle of the story. And the reason why I wanted to use music to engage this is because I firmly believe if you want to know something about somebody, look not to their accolades. Look not to what they say about themselves or the awards that they use. Instead, look to their Netflix queue. Look to their Spotify queue. Look and see what's on their playlist. Look at the books that they read. Look at the art on their walls. What we consume and what we engage with says more about us than anything else could, and there ain't nothing wrong with that. If you really want to get to know me, look at my playlists. Look at the music that moves me, the music that is woven throughout my life, the music I've grown up on, the music I listen to now. That says where my priorities are, what's important to me. That gives you a more accurate story. So that's why I wanted to use music. I also feel like it's a really interesting way to engage what social justice is. As a social justice minister, I can tell you that that phrase is losing meaning to me. I don't know what it means anymore. It's become a stand-in for something else, a stand-in for a type of transactional exchange. If we do X social justice thing, we get X social justice result. And we all know that life doesn't work that way. I've preached about that before. Life isn't transactional. It's not a matter of giving something to get something, no matter how much we want that to be true. There's also no hard and fast rules. There's not one thing you can apply to something and apply it broadly across forever and forevermore. And oftentimes in social justice spaces, we get stuck in those dichotomies of good and bad and right and wrong, and we do this and we get that, but it never works out that way. So what happens? We all turn on each other. We feel like there's nothing that we can really do. We get despondent, we get disenfranchised, we get disheartened, and it's heartbreaking and it's understanding. It's understandable how challenging it is to really engage social justice at all in this world. Last week, I was in West Virginia at a friend's installation. She just got settled in a congregation down there, a very small congregation. And one of the people who spoke at her installation said something brilliant. She said, "How do we do ministry when the world is on fire? How do we do ministry when the world is on fire?" And I would expand that to say, how do we do social justice when the world is on fire? When we are on fire, when we can't trust the information that's being presented to us, when we can't trust the systems that we've all been told our whole lives are systems that are trustworthy, the systems that make up the entire system that we all have to interact with, that we are dependent on in some way. How do we do ministry in the world when the world is falling apart? For my first year at this congregation, I didn't get to preach a sermon that I actually wrote in advance, because every single week last year, there was a new catastrophe, a new emergency, a new shooting, a new example of the administration saying something that denigrated people, that left people out in the cold. There was something new every single week, and I had to change my sermon every single week. How do you do ministry when the world is on fire? And how do you do social justice when nothing seems to make sense? I turned to hip hop because, of course, like I said earlier, that's what they did. That's what they did with blues. That's what they did with jazz. That's what they did with songs in the field, slave songs. Those are all narratives of how you make sense out of a world that was not made for you, a world that is on fire. What does it mean to tell the narrative and create your own narrative? And I view social justice as a way to describe and explore and engage in an expression of the time that we're in now. Social justice as an expression of the time that we are in right now. How do we use it as a tool to express ourselves? How do we use it as a tool to express what it means to be in this moment, in this world, right now? Not as something transactional, not as a set of actions that we do, but as a way to express the world. And of course, this isn't an exhaustive thing. This is not just one way to view it. But this is a way that I feel is much more substantive than the way that we typically view it, which is if we do something, we get something. It's never been that way. And so one of the tensions that I'm experiencing in social justice, I'm also experiencing in the larger UU culture. Unitarian Universalism, like every single institution in the United States and in the wider world right now, is undergoing multiple changes, multiple evolutions, all kinds of growing pains. And why? It's the same reason that any of this is happening. Someone last week at the installation also said, often there's a phrase that goes around like, we are the dreams of our ancestors and things like this. And she was saying if the UU founding people, the people who kind of really created Unitarian Universalism and shaped it into what it was, she said, we wouldn't be of their dreams, we'd probably be of their nightmares. They couldn't have imagined us, all of our identities. All of the ways this has expanded, all the ways this has grown, all the ways this has evolved, the histories that we think have just always been there, which haven't been there forever. We're not of their dreams. But that's what's beautiful about Unitarian Universalism. It is a living tradition, a flowing stream. And as we grow, and as we evolve, and as we change, of course we're going to have growing pains. Of course, we're going to realize that maybe, just maybe, the people who are here now weren't here then. Maybe this wasn't made by all of us who are here now. Maybe it has to evolve. Maybe it has to change. And those tensions will exist. One of the things that I'm exploring in my professional life especially is the shift from justice to liberation. Justice is often an outward-focused art. It's often, what do we need to do to change something outside of us? What do we need to pass? What do we need to enact? What do we need to create together? What do we need to build? And those are all very important questions, but it is typically outward-facing. It's typically something that we feel like we need to do to some other kind of entity. And then what often happens is we dig into the work and we realize there's a lot of unpacking to do for ourselves. And it's challenging, and it's hard, and it's grueling. And it's important, and we should be doing that. But one of the shifts that I'm seeing, that I'm also really all for, is the shift to liberation. Liberation being more inward as well as outward focused. Liberation being kind of the crux of this change. It's hard to say what comes first, the chicken or the egg, liberation or justice, but either way they are woven together with one another. Liberation being that inner work. Not trying to get perfect until you can get to a point where you can go do something in the world, because that's its own type of narrative that promotes this dichotomy between good and bad. It's not about being perfect. It's not about waiting until you have it all figured out. It's not about getting right with yourself before you can go do anything else. It's about getting free. It's about getting free, starting with where you have the most control, which is your own life. It doesn't have to exist at the opposite end of a spectrum. It can be on its own spectrum. But I explored that challenge, that change, that transition between justice and liberation so often because liberation has to be what happens. Liberation has to start with where we are with ourselves, where we are with each other, where we're at in our own communities, how that's shifting, how that's transforming, so that we can face the challenges of this world. Liberation gets us prepared to do that challenging work of unpacking, of trying new things, of transitioning, of changing, of making space, of shaking it up. That is necessary. We don't have a choice in those matters because there is no other way that anything happens. We all know that change is beyond our control. We all know that change happens no matter what we do, no matter how tightly we hold on to the way that things are. We all know that. Liberation is one tool to help us get our hearts right, as well as get our communities right with one another. That comparison with hip hop, I think, really works in that situation. The way that hip hop shook things up, and the way that it was threatening, the way that it was people tried to tap it down, they tried to suppress it, they tried to get rid of it, just like they did with all those art forms that I just spoke about, with jazz and with blues, with rock and roll, all of it. Tried to suppress it, tried to get rid of it. And why? Because it threatens things, because it shakes things up. It puts somebody else's narrative in the middle. It puts somebody else at the center, and that makes everything change when you do that. That is what liberation is. What does it mean to center our well-being? What does it mean to center vulnerability? What does it mean to center change? What does it mean to center somebody else? Not from guilt or from shame, not in order to guilt and berate ourselves, but what does it mean to shake things up in our lives? What does it mean for us to center liberation? It's not to say we get rid of social justice. It's not to say that social justice isn't important. It's to say that this world is changing. And the only way that we're going to survive is if we change with it. The only way that our movements are going to survive is if it changes with it. And each and every movement that is happening right now, on the forefront and in the center of those movements is change and liberation. You look at the youth who are leading these movements, the youth who are leading climate justice, the youth who are at the forefront of the gun epidemic in our country. You look at the way that the young people are leading, and they aren't doing it like it's always been done. And why? Because it's changing. Because it's changing. And at the center of those movements, what the young people are doing, and what young people have always done, what young people did 50 years ago, what young people did 100 years ago, is they shook it up. There's always resistance to that. There's always a way to want to suppress that. But that is what always shines through. We know that in our history. We know that every single force of change that's happened in our movements has been met with suspicion. It has been met with suppression. And yet the center of those movements is what we remember as the agents of change. Liberation is about getting free. Free with each other, free with ourselves. Loosening those chains of isolation. Loosening those chains of separation. Making space for each other, making space for what's to come, honoring what's gone before us, and moving down that flowing stream of our living tradition. Liberation is not the destination. We know that. It's the journey. It's what we do in our lives. It's what we do with one another. Liberation is the door that opens to everything else. It's the portal that we can go through. And it's not something that we have to work for. It's not something that we have to try to find or buy or create. It's something that awaits each and every single one of us in our hearts and the communities around us. It is an opportunity to engage in new ways, to work in different ways, to be in different ways, and to engage justice in a different way. So as we move through these months and we do these Justice Sundays, that will be the foundation from which I am working. That will be the foundation from which I am exploring. Not to try to save the world, but to save ourselves and save each other and get one another free. That's my medium. That's my hip hop. That's my music, that's my art. And that can be our story together. May we all do what we can in our lives to help each other get free. May we all search in our hearts for the ways that we can get free and loose the chains, be more honest, take these as opportunities. May we do it knowing that we are held in community and we belong to a living tradition, that none of this is in vain. May we forget our perfect offering. May we take risks and make mistakes, and may we do that over and over and over again. May it always be so in our hearts. Blessed be, and Ashe.